Jesus came down with them and stood on a level place. A level place, geologically speaking, would be a plain, a broad area of relatively flat land. Plains cover about a third of the Earth's surface, both on land and below the ocean, and exist on every continent. While in North America, our conception of plains is associated with the Great Plains, the large grassland in the Midwest, globally, plains are diverse. They exist as tropical jungles, as deserts, forests, and savannas. What all these places have in common is that they were formed more or less by erosion. The erosion happens both upwards and downwards, so to speak. Mountains and hills succumb to gravity, gradually releasing rock and soil from on high to the valleys below. And likewise, as rivers flow towards the ocean, they deposit sediment along the way. The sediment can eventually build up enough to rise above sea level, which creates coastal plains. So this great leveling of the earth has created a geography that has allowed for the flourishing of human civilization. Plains are generally excellent at sustaining life because of their fertile soil and their suitability for agriculture and grazing livestock. Terms like fertile crescent and breadbasket evoke the kind of abundance and blessing that these areas are for the civilizations that have cropped up in and around them. So it's no accident that Luke has Jesus preaching this message from a level place, a plain. In antiquity, this setting would also stand as a contrast to the godliness of the mountain from which Jesus has just descended in the preceding verses. The heights of the mountains were thought to be reaching up towards the heavens where God resided, leaving the low and level places to the messiness and mortality of human existence. Jesus also models a drastically equal relationship with people in this passage. He stands not up and over his disciples and crowds, as he does in Matthew's version, the Sermon on the Mount, but in this passage he stands alongside of them, level two. So on a level place, a place of abundance and flourishing, of equality and humanity, Jesus has gathered great crowds, multitudes, masses of people from all over, and he healed all of them. And then, looking up at his disciples, addressing this smaller group of people who had committed themselves to following Jesus, he offers them this message of blessings and woes. The blessings are easy to embrace, even as they offer a message of radical uplift of the outcast and lowly, the poor, the hungry, the grieving and persecuted. The blessings alone do not seem to upset anyone, or the social order, for that matter. But the woes, which are unique to Luke's gospel, well, they are challenging, to say the least. They are challenging on many levels. First, because most of us would distance ourselves from an idea of God as one who condemns. We reject the idea of a God who punishes or whose love and grace is limited in any way. Secondly, this language of blessings and woes is dissonant to our modern ears. What do these words mean? Are they promises of eternal peace or eternal condemnation? So it may be helpful to know that blessed does not mean saved in the way it is thrown around in contemporary parlance. Nor does it mean happiness or deliverance. Rather, its synonyms are closer to dignified, respected, enviable, satisfied, unburdened, or at peace. And for woe, Greek scholars suggest that it is more along the lines of a vocal lament, something like oi or alas. So hearing this doesn't necessarily erase the context of judgment in Jesus' words, but it does suggest that they are less a definitive state of being. The honor and the shame, the blessings and the woes are not permanent conditions. Hopefully our sound is also not permanently damaged here. but outcomes of an unequal relationship to society, to wealth, and to God. Mostly, this text is challenging because it makes us ask, where do we fit in? The unspoken question is, are we the rich ones? In a global context, we most certainly are. Just being in the United States almost automatically puts us there. And historically speaking, the scale of global wealth in our time is so incomprehensible to the time of Jesus that from the text point of view, I think we would register as somewhere just about off the scale in terms of wealth. And at the same time, here in our own community, and indeed in every community in this country and others, there is homelessness, hunger, the daily struggles of stress and sickness, exhaustion and strain that go along with poverty. So likely, I'll suggest that it's not worth trying to find the precise number that delineates the rich from the poor, but rather to lean into the emotional power of Jesus' message, the discomfort that it may cause. There is an old adage about what journalism is supposed to do that ministers have also attributed to our profession: to comfort the afflicted and to afflict the comfortable. You've probably heard that before. Well, I think that this passage certainly does that. When I was 16, I had the amazing opportunity to be an exchange student to Argentina. After much preparation and a teary goodbye with my parents, I boarded a plane in Chicago, flew first to Miami and then to Sao Paulo, Brazil, before finally landing in Buenos Aires. My host family picked me up in their little blue Peugeot, and we drove the hour or so to get to the small town where they lived. I was completely exhausted after a very long day of travel, straining to put my high school Spanish to work in a car, understanding about half of what was said, and maybe eking out a sentence or two. I was relieved when we finally pulled off the highway on the road leading into town. But before we got into anything that resembled a town in my American experience, we turned again onto an unpaved road with some houses that had fabric instead of windows, and chickens and scrap metal in the yard. My heart started racing. I somehow had not quite comprehended that this experience might mean leaving behind not just my family and my hometown, my native language and my high school for the year, but also leaving behind the material comforts of my middle-class American upbringing. And then, before I could panic too much, we turned into a driveway with a tall and wide gate, behind which was a large house that had a ceramic tile roof and a real Mediterranean feel. When we went inside, it had tile floors and no carpet, which at first felt austere, but then I realized this is a lot hotter than the climate of Wisconsin where I came from, and so what seemed like a lack of amenities were really luxury. It would take a few days before it really sunk in that I was staying with one of the wealthiest families in this town. And they lived on the outskirts beyond the poor outer ring that I had first observed on our drive-in. They had a lot of land, a swimming pool, they vacationed abroad regularly, and enjoyed a very comfortable life. In some ways more comfortable than that of my own family back in the United States. Needless to say, this was all very confusing to my teenage brain, and sort of still to my adult brain. Were they rich or poor? Was I rich or poor? It was all relative. In the end, my experience that year was shaped not by the economic reality of a developing nation, but by the generosity and hospitality of my hosts and the people that I would come to know there. My fear and vulnerability were met by overwhelming welcome. I did not miss the creature comforts of my United States home, but occasionally, and instead was filled with a spirit of awe at the grace of complete strangers who made themselves friends. You certainly don't have to travel to another country to experience the eye-opening chasm between rich and poor. And our discomfort of placing ourselves somewhere on this scale of wealth is, I think, a good thing. It's good because I think it means that we realize that wealth isn't just a number, but a product of a broader societal relationship. My discomfort with assessing my own and my family's class status in a new country was brought about by coming into a relationship with new people and a new place. Perhaps somewhere we have a suspicion that our own material comforts are a product of an economic relationship that benefits some and harms others. And this comfort might cause us to ask where God is in this relationship. Well, as Dr. Tracy West taught us last week, when she preached about another text in Luke with very similar themes, this scripture calls our attention to God's activity in this world. Here, Luke asks us to look for God's movement from the mountain to the plain, lifting up the lowly and bringing down the mighty. God's activity is not just a thing of the past. Indeed, the tumult of recent years has shown in some dramatic ways this movement of divine reversal. Poor and working people fighting for $15 in a union. Teachers on strike in state after state, not just for their own working conditions, but for the success of their students and schools which have been starved of resources. New movements to expand health care, raise minimum wages, create parental leaves and sick time for everyone. There is more acknowledgement now that income inequality and economic inequality more broadly is a serious problem in the United States than at any time since the last Gilded Age. Even in some of the places known for their exclusivity and wealth, in Aspen and Davos, new conversations are emerging around inequality. Anand Giridharadas, who's a journalist and author of the book Winner Take All, addressed the Aspen Institute last year and sparked a great deal of controversy when he dared some of the richest people in the world, many of whom are great philanthropists, to question the framework of doing good by doing well. He dared to say that the current economic system is so rigged that it will take not just generosity, but justice to reverse it. That it might require the wealthy not just to give back, but to take less. He made the point that extreme wealth isn't created in a vacuum, but only through the impoverishment of others. And similarly, a panel at the Davos World Economic Forum a few weeks ago drew attention when historian Rutger Bregman and Oxfam director Winnie Byanyima brought up the taboo topic of taxes on a panel there. While there is plenty of room for disagreement over economic theories and possible solutions, and as I encourage the children that we should invite more creativity and more options, my point here is just to say that people are examining the relationship between unrestrained wealth and inequality. They are examining the relationship between the mountains and the valleys and guiding us towards a more level place. I would consider these conversations seismic activity on the mountainous peaks of Aspen and Davos. The erosion of the consensus about philanthropy being the only activity to mitigate against poverty is an opening for a more robust vision of an abundant and level future. The dissatisfaction with our current inequality is a spiritual dis-ease. It is a sign that people in all places on the economic scale seek a healthier relationship with one another, that all kinds of people seek the blessing of a level place. Right here in New Jersey, advocates won a long-fought battle to raise the minimum wage. Last month, Governor Murphy signed into law a bill that will raise the wage for the state to $15 an hour by 2024. The United Way released a statement in response, though, explaining that while $15 may sound good now, data from their ALICE project, which stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, Employed, so poor working people, shows that by 2024, when this minimum wage hike is fully implemented, it will likely cost $22 an hour for a single person and over $50 an hour to sustain a family of four. Almost 40% of the state falls below that threshold of earning what they term a stable living. That's 1.2 million people just in New Jersey. more personal experience, I heard an interview with the author of a new book a couple of weeks ago. Stephanie Land has a new memoir called Maid, which is about her experience working in Washington State as a maid and her struggles of earning minimum wage as a single mother. One of the stories she told that gripped me was the stress of going grocery shopping with food stamps. She recounted that not only was it hard sometimes to stretch the meager allowance into food for the whole month, but it was the indignity of only being allowed to buy certain items. She talked about having to triple check that the eggs she would buy were medium, not small or large, not organic or anything other than the exact brand and type that food stamp regulation would allow her. If she accidentally picked up the wrong ones, it would result in embarrassment at the checkout, a hassle with her toddler in tow and other people behind her in line, or worse, ending up without eggs in her fridge. Well, Jesus, the one who offers universal healing, unfettered grace, and abundant bread, might sigh. Alas. It is up to faith communities to expand the moral imagination of our society, to push to consider well-being, to consider life, to consider blessing when we legislate poverty. It's not enough to hope that the floor, the minimums, creep up just enough for people to scrape by. Jesus proclaims blessing, proclaims that the kingdom of God itself is what the poor deserve. Blessing, dignity, honor, peace. May we dare to seek blessings, not just bare minimums, for those who have been impoverished. May we dare to offer fullness of life and laughter for those who have been oppressed. May we dare to overturn the tables of injustice and bring down the mountains of inequality and seek a level place for all to be healed. Amen.